The morning sun filtered through the hospital window as Sarah sat beside Michael's bed, her fingers gently tracing the lines on his weathered hand. After 43 years of marriage, she knew every scar, every callus that told the story of their life together. The doctors had been clear. The cancer had spread too far and there was nothing more they could do. Michael had perhaps days, maybe a week if they were lucky. Sarah remembered the day they first met at the small coffee shop downtown. She was 22, fresh out of college, nervously waiting for a job interview. Michael was 25, confident and charming, ordering his usual black coffee. When he accidentally knocked over her purse, spilling papers everywhere, she was mortified. But Michael got down on his knees, carefully collecting every document, and when he handed them back, he smiled and said, "I think fate wanted us to meet today." That was the beginning of everything. Now, as she watched his chest rise and fall with each labored breath, Sarah felt the weight of all those years pressing down on her. 3 children they had raised together, countless birthdays and anniversaries, fights and reconciliations, dreams fulfilled and dreams deferred. The small apartment they could barely afford as newlyweds had grown into a warm family home, filled with laughter and love. Michael stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Sarah's face lined with worry and exhaustion from sleepless nights at his bedside, he managed a weak smile. "Still here, my beautiful girl?" he whispered, using the same nickname he had called her for over 4 decades. Sarah felt tears threatening to spill, but she held them back, not wanting him to see her break down. She leaned closer, smoothing back his thin gray hair. "Where else would I be?" she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her heart. "The kids are coming today. Emma's driving up from Portland and the boys are taking the morning flight from Chicago." Michael nodded slowly, understanding what this meant. Their children, now adults with families of their own, were coming to say goodbye. As the day progressed, the room filled with the soft sounds of family. Quiet conversations, gentle laughter as they shared memories, and the rustle of tissues being passed around. Sarah never left Michael's side, her hand always within reach of his, anchoring him to this world just a little longer. She watched their children, Emma with her father's stubborn chin, David with his gentle eyes, and Thomas with his quick wit, and marveled at how they had created these beautiful human beings together. The afternoon brought a peaceful stillness. Michael seemed more alert, as if gathering his remaining strength for something important. He looked at each of his children, whispered words of love and wisdom, shared private jokes that made them smile through their tears, but his gaze always returned to Sarah, the woman who had been his constant companion, his greatest love, his anchor in every storm life had thrown their way. Evening approached with a golden glow that seemed to wrap the hospital room in warmth. The children had stepped out to get dinner, giving their parents a moment alone together. Sarah adjusted Michael's pillow and pulled the blanket up to his chest, the same caring gesture she had performed thousands of times throughout their marriage when he was sick or tired. "Do you remember our first dance?" Michael asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart ached at the memory. It was at their wedding, in the small church where they had exchanged vows on a budget so tight they served homemade cake and asked friends to bring covered dishes. The band was just Michael's cousin with a guitar, but when they played their song, "The Way You Look Tonight," nothing else mattered. "You stepped on my dress," Sarah said with a soft laugh, settling into the chair that had become her second home, "and you were so nervous you forgot the steps we practiced." Michael's eyes crinkled at the corners the same way they had when he laughed for 43 years. "But you didn't mind," he replied. "You just held me tighter and whispered that we had the rest of our lives to get it right." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. Sarah thought about all the sunsets they had shared, on their honeymoon at the lake cottage they could barely afford, from the porch of their first real house, during family vacations where they chased toddlers and wiped sticky fingers. Even through the difficult years when money was tight and stress ran high, they had always found time to pause together and appreciate the beauty of another day ending. "I need you to promise me something," Michael said, his grip on her hand growing stronger despite his weakness. Sarah looked at him intently, prepared to agree to anything. "I need you to keep living. Really living. Not just existing, but finding joy again. Take that art class you always talked about. Travel to Ireland like we planned. Don't spend the rest of your life just missing me. Sarah felt tears finally spill over, running down her cheeks unchecked. "I don't know how to do this without you," she admitted, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart since the diagnosis. "You've been my everything for so long." Michael brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, just as he had done every morning when he left for work and every evening when he returned home. "You're stronger than you know," he told her. "You raised 3 incredible children while working full-time. You took care of your mother for 2 years when she was sick. You held our family together through everything. You're going to be okay, Sarah. Different, but okay." His words were punctuated by a coughing fit that left him exhausted, but his eyes remained fixed on hers with unwavering love. The children returned as darkness settled over the hospital. They brought stories of their day, updates from grandchildren via video calls, and a warmth that filled the room despite the heaviness of the situation. Emma had brought photos on her phone of their newest grandchild, little Lucy, who had taken her first steps the week before. Michael smiled as he watched the video, his face lighting up with the joy of being a grandfather, a role he had treasured above all others in recent years. The night shift brought a different energy to the hospital. Softer voices, dimmer lights, and the sense that the world was settling into rest. Sarah had convinced the children to go to the hotel for a few hours of sleep, promising to call if anything changed. She needed this time alone with Michael, these precious hours that felt suspended between day and tomorrow. Michael had dozed off and on throughout the evening, but now his breathing seemed more labored. Sarah could see the exhaustion in every line of his face, the way his body was slowly surrendering despite his spirit's determination to stay. She found herself memorizing everything, the sound of his breathing, the weight of his hand in hers, the familiar scent of his cologne that still lingered despite days in the hospital bed. "Tell me about the day Thomas was born," Michael whispered suddenly, startling Sarah from her thoughts. She smiled, remembering their youngest child's dramatic entrance into the world during a snowstorm that left them stranded at home. "You delivered him yourself when the ambulance couldn't get through," she said. "I was so scared, but you were so calm. You kept telling me everything would be fine, that we could do this together." "I was terrified," Michael admitted with a weak chuckle. "I just read a book about it the month before, and suddenly there I was, catching our son as he came into the world. But when I heard his first cry and saw your face, I knew we could handle anything life threw at us." That moment had defined their approach to every challenge they faced as parents and partners. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. They talked quietly through the night, sharing memories that seemed to float in the darkness around them. Their first apartment with the leaky faucet and the neighbor who played music too loud. The Christmas when they had no money for gifts but made stockings filled with handwritten promises of future adventures. The day they paid off their mortgage and danced in the kitchen like teenagers. The afternoon they became grandparents for the first time, and Michael cried harder than Sarah had ever seen him cry. As dawn approached, Sarah noticed a change in Michael's breathing. It became more shallow, more irregular. She pressed the call button for the nurse, who arrived quickly and checked his vital signs with gentle efficiency. "It won't be long now," the nurse said softly, placing a compassionate hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Would you like me to call your children?" Sarah nodded, though part of her wanted to keep this moment just for them a little longer. The phone calls were brief and urgent. Within 30 minutes, Emma, David, and Thomas were back at their father's bedside, their faces marked by the reality that this was goodbye. They gathered around the bed, each taking turns to whisper final words, to share one last "I love you," to thank him for being the father who taught them how to be good people. But Sarah remained at Michael's side, her forehead pressed against his, whispering the words she had said every night for over 4 decades. "Sweet dreams, my love. I'll be right here when you wake up." Even as the machines began to show the inevitable truth, even as their children wept quietly around them, Sarah continued to be Michael's anchor, his safe harbor, his greatest love until the very end. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the hospital window again when Michael took his last peaceful breath, surrounded by the family he had loved with his whole heart, held in the arms of the woman who had been his everything for 43 beautiful years. The silence that followed was different from any quiet Sarah had ever experienced. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a Sunday morning in bed with Michael, or the peaceful quiet of their garden at twilight. This was the silence of absence, of a heartbeat that would never sound again, of a voice that would never call her name. She continued to hold his hand, unwilling to let go of the physical connection that had anchored her for so many years. Emma was the first to move, gently placing her hand on her mother's shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "He's at peace now. He's not in pain anymore." Sarah knew her daughter was trying to comfort her, but the words felt hollow in the face of such profound loss. How could peace feel like such devastation? How could the end of suffering create such unbearable emptiness? The next hours passed in a blur of necessary tasks and unwanted decisions. Funeral arrangements to be made, people to be called, a lifetime of belongings to be sorted through. Sarah moved through it all like she was underwater, her children's voices sounding distant and muffled. The funeral director spoke about caskets and flowers and memorial services, but all Sarah could think about was the way Michael used to hum while shaving in the morning. Off-key but happy. The house felt impossibly large and quiet when they finally returned home. Every room held memories that seemed to echo in the emptiness. The coffee mug Michael had left unwashed in the sink the morning they rushed to the hospital. His reading glasses on the nightstand beside a book he would never finish. The throw pillow on his side of the couch, still holding the impression of his body from the last time he had sat there. Sarah's sister Margaret arrived that evening with casseroles and practical comfort, the same way she had appeared during every crisis of Sarah's adult life. She moved quietly through the house, answering the phone, accepting flower deliveries and making sure Sarah ate something, even though food tasted like cardboard. "You don't have to be strong right now," Margaret said as she found Sarah standing in the doorway of the bedroom she had shared with Michael. "He would want you to grieve." That night, alone in their bed for the first time in over 4 decades, Sarah finally let herself fall apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside her chest, raw and painful and necessary. She buried her face in Michael's pillow, breathing in his scent, and let the waves of grief wash over her without trying to fight them or make them prettier or more manageable. She cried for all the conversations they would never have, all the anniversaries they wouldn't celebrate, all the grandchildren's milestones he would miss. She cried for the retirement they had planned, the trips they had dreamed of taking, the quiet years they thought they had earned together. She cried for the simple everyday losses. No one to make coffee for in the morning, no one to share the newspaper with, no one to laugh at her terrible jokes. But mixed in with the grief was something else Sarah hadn't expected: gratitude. Despite the pain of losing him, she felt overwhelmingly grateful for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. Not everyone was lucky enough to experience a love like theirs, a partnership that had grown stronger with time rather than weaker. Not everyone got 43 years of being truly, completely loved by another person. The funeral was held on a Tuesday morning in the same small church where Sarah and Michael had been married, 43 years earlier. The sanctuary was filled to capacity with family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues, whose lives had been touched by Michael's gentle kindness and unwavering integrity. Sarah sat in the front pew, flanked by her children, listening to person after person share stories about her husband that revealed the full scope of his impact on the world. His former student spoke about how Michael had stayed after school every day for a month to help him with math, never making him feel stupid or ashamed of needing extra help. A neighbor told the story of how Michael had quietly shoveled her driveway every winter for 20 years after her husband died, never asking for thanks or recognition. His brother shared memories of their childhood, of Michael's protective nature and his ability to find humor in the darkest moments. Emma delivered a eulogy that captured her father's essence perfectly: his terrible dad jokes, his unwavering support for his children's dreams even when they seemed impossible, his habit of leaving encouraging notes in their lunchboxes long after they claimed to be too old for such things. She spoke about the way he had loved their mother with complete devotion, setting an example of what real partnership looked like that had shaped all of their relationships. When it was time for the final goodbye, Sarah approached the casket with trembling legs. She had written a letter the night before, filled with all the things she hadn't had time to say in those last precious hours. She tucked it beside the photo of their wedding day that would rest with him forever, 2 young people with their whole lives ahead of them, radiant with hope and love and the unshakable belief that together they could overcome anything. The burial was private, attended only by immediate family. As they lowered Michael's casket into the ground, Sarah felt a piece of her heart go with him. The children each threw a handful of earth, and then it was Sarah's turn. She picked up the small shovel with hands that shook like autumn leaves, and as the dirt fell onto the casket with a sound like rain, she whispered the words she had said to him every night. "Sweet dreams, my love." In the weeks that followed, Sarah learned to navigate a world that felt fundamentally changed. Friends and family visited regularly at first, but eventually their own lives called them back to normalcy, leaving Sarah to figure out what her new normal would look like. The house felt too big and too quiet, but it also felt like Michael. Every room held his presence. Every corner whispered with his memory. She began to establish new routines, painful at first, but gradually becoming sources of small comfort. Coffee for one in the morning, but made the way Michael had taught her, strong and black with just a touch of cinnamon. Reading the newspaper aloud to the empty kitchen, sharing her opinions on politics and local news with someone who could no longer respond, but whose reaction she could still imagine perfectly. Slowly, very slowly, Sarah began to understand what Michael had meant about living rather than just existing. She started taking walks in the park where they used to stroll together on Sunday afternoons, initially feeling his absence like a physical ache, but eventually finding moments of peace in the familiar paths and changing seasons. She began to see their love not as something that had ended, but as something that had transformed. Still present, still powerful, just expressed differently now. 6 months after Michael's passing, Sarah found herself standing in front of the community center, clutching a flyer for watercolor painting classes. It was something she had mentioned wanting to try years ago, back when the days were filled with raising children and managing households, and there never seemed to be time for such luxuries. Michael had always encouraged her artistic side, buying her sketch pads and charcoal pencils for birthdays even when their budget was tight. The instructor, a patient woman named Helen whose own husband had passed away 2 years earlier, welcomed Sarah with understanding eyes and a gentle smile. "Art can be healing," she said simply, setting up an easel beside Sarah's. "It gives us a way to express what words sometimes cannot." That first class was clumsy and frustrating. Sarah's hands seemed to have forgotten how to hold a brush, and her attempts at capturing the simple still life looked more like abstract explosions of color. But something about the process soothed her grieving heart. The concentration required to mix colors and control water flow gave her mind a respite from the constant ache of missing Michael. Week by week, her techniques improved, but more importantly, her spirit began to emerge from the fog of grief. She painted sunsets that reminded her of evenings on their porch, flowers from the garden Michael had tended with such care, and abstract pieces that somehow captured emotions she couldn't put into words. Emma worried that her mother was isolating herself, but Sarah was actually discovering a different kind of connection. The other widows in her art class became unexpected friends, women who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding life after losing a life partner. They shared coffee after class, exchanging stories and strategies for dealing with everything from loneliness to learning to manage finances alone. One day, while painting in her studio, the spare bedroom she had converted with the easel Michael had bought her for their last Christmas together, Sarah realized she was humming. It was the same off-key melody Michael used to hum while shaving, and the recognition made her smile instead of cry. She understood then that grief and joy could coexist, that loving someone didn't require constant sadness in their absence. The first anniversary of Michael's death arrived with the gentle persistence of changing seasons. Sarah woke early and visited his grave, bringing fresh flowers and the first watercolor painting she had completed that she was truly proud of. A portrait of their hands intertwined, painted from a photograph taken on their 40th anniversary. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the headstone. "I'm living, not just existing." That evening, the children gathered at Sarah's house for dinner, a tradition they had established to honor their father's memory, while celebrating the family he had helped create. They shared stories both sad and funny, looked through old photo albums, and marveled at how their mother had grown stronger, without losing the essential kindness and love that had defined her throughout their childhood. As the evening wound down and her family prepared to leave, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settling over her. The love she had shared with Michael hadn't ended with his death. It had transformed into something that would continue to influence every day of her remaining life. She carried his wisdom in her decisions, his kindness in her interactions with others, and his unwavering belief in her strength as she faced each new challenge. Standing in her garden as the sun set behind the trees Michael had planted when they first moved to this house, Sarah spoke to him as naturally as if he were standing beside her. "Thank you for 43 years of teaching me how to love," she said softly. "Thank you for showing me I was stronger than I knew. And thank you for loving me enough to let me go." The evening breeze rustled the leaves in response, and Sarah smiled, knowing that some goodbyes are not endings but transformations, and that the greatest love stories continue even after the final embrace.